Hello and welcome back to Jenna Gets Creative. Why is my desk covered in markers, you ask? Well, simple answer really. One of you asked me to compare brush nibs, and I'm pretty sure that you were talking about alcohol markers, but I don't do anything by halves. Let's go ahead and compare brush nibs on every type of marker I have. It's time for the brush nib Showdown. I have a total of 42 different brands and types of markers that I will be comparing today. We are going to look at basic ink fineliner type brush markers. We're going to look at alcohol markers, watercolor markers, and we do actually have 2 acrylic paint markers with brush nibs to compare as well. What I am going to do, I am going to rate out of 10 longevity of the nib, flexibility, stability, ink flow, blending / dilution / solubility, whatever's most appropriate for the ink type, and line quality. Every marker will get a total, and I will determine a winner for each of the 4 categories that way. Obviously, this is not an exhaustive list. I don't have every brand in existence. Wherever possible, we are going to test black ink or the darkest gray. When we get down into this blending, dilution, solubility area, I am going to try to do basic blends where I can. Where I was able to, I have selected a red, orange, yellow set for blending. Some of them have different colors or only 2 colors just because of the selection I have available to choose from. Ready? Let's go. Let's get the smallest category out of the way and do the acrylic markers. I am testing on both cardstock and mixed media paper. For some types of ink, like the alcohol, I will only be using the cardstock, but for things that are going to be blended with water, I will also use the mixed media paper. I've chosen these because they are very cheap, very basic, and we are not going to be blaming or attributing anything on the paper. For nib longevity, I gave Karin a 10 out of 10. I have owned the watercolor version of this brand for 2 years, and the nibs are still perfect. Artline, they are starting to go a little bit fuzzy, and I've had them for about the same amount of time. Flexibility, the Karin markers are not quite as flexible as the Artline, so I gave the Artline an edge. I rated Karin a 7 and Artline an 8. Both of them get an 8 out of 10 for stability of the marker nib. It is fairly easy to control what you're doing with the nib. Ink flow, 10 out of 10 on both of them. You get some very nice wet ink, no splotchiness, no gaps. Perfect. In the blending, dilution, and solubility category, these are paint markers. It's kind of hard to judge this. I did do a straight just the nibs blend and a water-based blend. Both of them do water down and dissolve. The Karin dissolves better. The Karin does actually attempt to do a blend with just the nibs if you get there fast enough, but that is very permanent once it's dry. By the time you get them wet, they have dried, so the wet blending didn't work quite so well. In terms of trying to blend with the marker's own nibs, I give Karin the edge. In terms of trying to blend wet, I give Decorite the edge. I never would have tried wet blending with Decorite before, so for this category I gave Karin a 6 and Artline a 6.5. Finally, for line quality, I gave Karin a 7. It is easy to get a good line, but since it is such a thick nib, you're not going to get the finest line. You are going to get feathering on the edges. Artline is a 6.5, a little bit more wobble in there, very, very similar. Total score, Karin got 48 and Artline got 47. Very close, almost a tie, but the winner for the brush nib acrylic marker category is Karin Decobrush. First up in the watercolor marker category, we have Faber-Castell's Albrecht Dürer watercolor markers. These are artist grade, they are completely light fast, they have a brush and a bullet nib. For longevity, I rated these a 10 out of 10. They are very sturdy, hard nibs. They have not attempted to fray yet. I got these when this was a brand new line. Flexibility, 6. They are definitely not as flexible as either of the acrylic marker nibs we just saw. Stability, 8. They're about the same as the ones we just saw. Flow is 9 out of 10. It's pretty darn good, but it's not as wow impactful as those acrylic markers we just saw. Line quality, 7, on par with the Karin. There's just the slightest bit of wobble, but you can get an amazingly really good fine line if you have good marker control using just the tip of the brush. Overall possible score out of 60, these markers get a 50 out of 60. I do expect they are going to be in the top end of the category, but something tells me they're actually not going to win this one. Next up is the Winsor Newton watercolor markers, also a professional artist grade supply, not necessarily all light fast. For longevity, I give these an 8 out of 10. These nibs are going to wear out faster. For flexibility, 10 out of 10. These are super spongy, flexible. Stability, though, 6 out of 10. The flexibility does make them harder to control. Ink flow, same as the Faber-Castell, 9 out of 10. Blending, slightly better, 8.5. Nib to nib was not that great, not seeing much, but with wet techniques, both marker on the page and blended and picking up off the marker with the brush, much better results, and these are watercolor markers, so those are the results we are looking at. Line quality, 6 out of 10, a little bit worse than the Faber-Castell. Total is 47.5. These come in with a lower score than the Faber-Castell purely because the super flexible nibs are not as easily controlled and they're not going to last as long. Third in the watercolor list, we have the Tombow dual brush art pens, the water-based ABT markers. Longevity, 10 out of 10. I have had the black one for 3 years now and it's perfect. Flexibility, 8 out of 10. Stability, 8 out of 10. Flow, again, 9 out of 10. Pretty comparable with the other ones so far. Blending, I am calling this a 7. It's the worst score so far in the category. Nib to nib, didn't really see a whole lot of blending. Picking it up off of the nibs, I can't even see the middle color. Putting them down on the paper and then wetting to blend, that so far is the best result for that particular test, but it only passes 1 out of 3 tests. These markers, that is how you're supposed to use them, that or putting them on another surface and picking them up, not picking them up directly off the nib. We don't have time for that. Line quality, 7 out of 10. Total for the Tombow dual brush art markers is 49 out of 60. That puts it 1 point behind the Faber-Castell Albrecht Dürer. Karin Brushmarker Pro, their watercolor markers. Some of these scores will obviously be exactly the same as the Decobrush because it is the same nib. Also the same barrels. Longevity, 10 out of 10. Flexibility, 7 out of 10. Stability, 8 out of 10. Flow, 9 out of 10. I am reducing this from the 10 out of 10 for the Decobrush. It's the same as all the other watercolor markers so far. There is just a little bit of white flecking showing through on the page. Blending, this is where it shines. 9.5 out of 10, almost perfect. Not quite perfect because the straight nibs down on the page you do still see just a little bit of each stroke, but pretty darn good, especially compared to the others in the category so far. We do have the added use of their own blender. This is the only watercolor marker I own that has its own blender pen. I don't like it all that much. I don't think I have the best technique with it. I do think this is designed for the calligraphers, so we'll forgive that. Both wet techniques, spectacular blends. I really need to get using these more again. I forgot why I love them. Line quality, again, 7 out of 10, and total score is 50.5, putting these ahead of the Faber-Castell Albrecht Dürer. Marabu Aqua Pen Graphix, these are brush and bullet nib. It's hard to decide which items went in the ink and which items went in the watercolor. These claim to be a watercolor marker, so that's where I put them. I would really argue that they're not. Longevity, 8 out of 10. Flexibility, 8 out of 10. Stability, 7 out of 10. That good flexibility does make a little bit of a wobble into it. Flow, 10 out of 10. These do have the best flow so far in the watercolor category. Blending, solubility, that kind of stuff. I'm calling this an 8 out of 10. It's comparable with the Albrecht Dürer. And line quality, 7 out of 10. Pretty average for these. I did want to comment on the blending test. Nib down on the paper. You are seeing all the hard stops and it is going to eat the paper a lot. That's why I don't like these, but with wet techniques, putting it down on the paper and then blending, these blend beautifully, and I do believe that that is how they're intended to be used, and that's why they're being called a watercolor marker. If you pick the ink up any other way and try to put it down on the paper, you're just not going to see anything. The ink in these ones isn't that great. That's not what we're judging. Total score out of 60 is 48. That puts them right in the middle of the crowd so far. Next is the Spectrum Noir Aquatint. This is one of 3 of the same type you're going to see in this category. These are individual fibers like a paintbrush. They are a water brush with ink in them. Longevity, 9 out of 10. Not much is going to happen to destroy them overall, but you might lose pieces. You might lose individual strands. You might have rogues that poke the wrong way. Flexibility, 10 out of 10. You can't get much better than that. Stability, 4 out of 10. It's like controlling a cheap paintbrush. Flow, 10 out of 10, you can squeeze it to get more ink if you want to. Blending, 9 out of 10, almost perfect. Putting it directly down on the page was definitely better than putting it down on the page and wetting it. And with this type of brush, there was no point in doing that third test. Line quality, 5 out of 10. What can you expect with a paintbrush brush that's plastic fibers? Overall score is 47 out of 60, which does make it the lowest score so far, but not by much, only by half a point. SketchBox Signature Color Brush, this is the same sort of thing, liquid watercolor ink in a water brush pen, but these were made exclusively by SketchBox. Longevity, 9 out of 10, same problems, and as you may have noticed on the blue one, I do have rogue hairs that have been pushed in the wrong direction. Flexibility, 10 out of 10. Stability, 5 out of 10 instead of 4. These are a little firmer, a little easier to control. Flow is 10 out of 10. Blending is 8.5 out of 10, a little bit worse than the Aquatint. I would say blending capability is the same, whether you're just blending with the brushes themselves or also blending with water, but I did not get as smooth of a blend as the Spectrum Noir. Line quality is 6 out of 10, 1 point better than the Spectrum Noir, again because it is a little bit more firm, a little bit easier to control. Overall, 48.5 out of 60. That actually makes it third best so far. Last of its kind, but not last in the category, is the Kuretake Cambio. This is again similar to the Aquatint and the SketchBox color brush. I only have one of this one, so it was hard to judge the blendability. Longevity, same story, 9 out of 10. Flexibility, 10 out of 10. Stability, 5 out of 10, similar to that Sketchbox. Flow, only 8 out of 10. This is in the type of brush nib that is meant to have flow control, but it's a hard barrel, there is no squeeze point, you have absolutely no control, and it does flow quite slowly. Blendability, since I don't have another one, I tried blending it into the other two, and I did water it down just to see how reactive it is, and I've determined it's probably about the same as the Sketchbox, 8.5 out of 10. Line quality, 5 out of 10, same as the Spectrum Noir. It's a little bit harder to control that line. Overall, 45.5 out of 60. That is our worst score so far. I'm gonna go ahead and say this type of brush nib is not performing as well as the felt type brush nibs, and the fact that you can't control the ink flow in this one, that's just the nail in the coffin. Touch 10, these are a cheap Chinese Asian market site type version of what you would get from, say, Ohuhu's water brush pens. I got these off of Wish, I believe, and I lied. These are the individual fiber type brushes as well. Forgot about that. Longevity, 8 out of 10. Asterisk, the ink is not going to last very long in these ones. Many of them are already drying up, and I haven't used them much because I don't like them. They smell weird. You don't get the control. Moving on with the numbers. Flexibility, 10 out of 10. Just like the rest of this brush type, they are very flexible. Stability, 4 out of 10, comparable to the Aquatint. Flow, surprisingly the worst for this brush type. 7 out of 10. Very, very patchy. You cannot control the flow. They're a firm barrel, but they're also just not getting through all of the fibers, and I think that's because it's a smaller overall brush. Blendability, 9 out of 10. Amazingly good, if you don't mind the fact that it's going to eat up the paper a little bit. Line quality, 6 out of 10. Overall, 44 out of 60. This is our loser so far, lowest score I've got. Last and honestly least, Dual Art Marker. This is another cheap Asian market site version of something you could get from Ohuhu for better quality. I don't even know what company makes this. It's not labeled, it just says Dual Art Marker. These are a brush and a fine liner nib. They are water-based. I think they would like to be watercolors, so I put them in the watercolor category. They also probably could have gone in the ink category. I play with these with my daughter in coloring books, and they're great for that purpose, not necessarily for art. Longevity, 6 out of 10. As I tried to show you on screen, the brush nibs are starting to go lumpy and fuzzy. Flexibility, 7 out of 10. They're okay. Stability, 7 out of 10. Definitely better than those individual fiber ones we've been seeing, but not amazing. Flow, 8 out of 10. Blending, dilution, that kind of stuff. Nibs directly down on the paper, they're not horrible. You can definitely see where things end, but you are getting some transitional tones. Wet techniques, just horrible. Line quality, 7 out of 10. Overall score is 42 out of 60, and these are the least in the category. Winner for the category is Karin Brushmarker Pro, followed by half a point by the Faber-Castell Albrecht Dürer. First up in the ink pen category is the Tombow Fudenosuke pen, and this is actually quite a complicated one because there are so many types of Fudenosuke pens. I have the typical Fudenosuke pen in black ink in the soft and hard nibs, but I also have the dual, which is the softer nib in black and gray ink, and on the blending side I will be doing a red, orange, yellow blend. I rate these a 7 on longevity. Most of the nibs are similar to something like a Micron PN. They are a hard plastic tapered nib that is slightly flexible, and those will last a long time. The softer nibs are closer to a traditional marker brush nib. Those are more susceptible to damage. My Fudenosuke collection in particular fell victim to the preschooler a few months back, and some of the pens just don't write the same since she got a hold of them, even though they don't show visible damage and even though they don't appear to be dried up. Flexibility, 6 out of 10. This one's hard to judge because there are so many different nib types. We do have some super flexible ones and we do have some barely flexible ones. Stability, I debated whether or not to give this a 9 or 10. I'm calling it a 10 because the firmer nibs are super stable, very easy to control that line. The softer ones, the more flexible ones, a little bit harder, but they are in the minority among the Fudenosuke collection. Flow, 9 out of 10, pretty darn good for an ink pen. I do expect we're going to see some better ones. Pretty much all of the watercolor pens got 9 out of 10, so I figured it's okay to start this category with a 9 out of 10. Blending, 7 out of 10. Remember, this category is blending, dilution, and solubility. I have painted with these before by scribbling on a non-porous surface and picking it back up with water. You can do that. The ink is soluble if you are using the right techniques. It's not wow super pigmented. You're not going to get a lot of blending or solubility putting the ink directly down on the page. They are designed to be fairly water resistant when put down that way, so we can't really fault it. You do get a surprisingly good blend for the type of marker these are if you try to blend colors into each other. Forgive the roughness of the orange in the blend you're seeing on screen. Apparently my orange Fudenosuke is one of the ones that didn't survive the preschooler. Line quality, 9 out of 10, almost perfect. The softer nib options take it down a little bit. Total, 48 out of 60. Next is the Pentel Colorbrush pen. This is similar to the Spectrum Noir Aquatint, those kind of pens. I included this in the ink category because this is most definitely traditional India ink drawing ink and not a liquid watercolor. Longevity, 9 out of 10. Flexibility, 10 out of 10. This is the most flexible type of brush you're gonna get. Stability, 7 out of 10. This one is somehow easier to control than the other ones of its type in the watercolor category, but not amazing. Flow, 10 out of 10. This is the best you can hope for in an ink brush pen. Blending, 9 out of 10. The others of its type in the watercolor category were 7 or 8. I'm calling this one a 9 because in the ink category we're not expecting perfect blends, but this one dissolves and spreads out with water into a beautiful gradient, and that's what you want in an India ink drawing pen. Line quality, 8 out of 10. If you are really good with hand lettering, if you're really good at calligraphy, if you are really purposeful and practiced in your illustration line weights, you can get exactly what you want with this pen. If you're not used to fine detail brush work with a paintbrush style nib, it's gonna wobble all over the place. So 8 out of 10. Total 53 out of 60. This is the highest grade we've given anything on the list so far. The Pentel Sign brushes are an interesting case. These are both called Pentel Sign pen. One of them is a fairly firm, rounded, tapered nib similar to the harder Tombow Fudenosuke's. The other one is a very long and skinny cousin of the Pentel Colorbrush. It's individual fibers. I chose to assess these together because if I didn't, I probably would have excluded the harder nib from the brush category at all because it is so firm. Longevity, 9 out of 10, possibility of rogue fibers. The harder one, the traditional sign pen, that nib's pretty much indestructible. Flexibility, hard to judge. I gave it a 5.5. The brush-ended one, the one with individual fibers, that is obviously like 10 out of 10 super flexible, but the traditional one, the harder nib, that is so inflexible that, like I said, if I only had that one, I wouldn't consider it a brush pen. Stability, 7.5. That's just balancing the fact that the hard one one is super 10 out of 10 stable, and the brush nib individual fibers is super floppy. Flow, 9 out of 10. Honestly, the black one impressed me almost as much as the Colorbrush, but the pink one with the individual fibers, a little bit harder to get the even coverage on the page you want. Blending, dilution, solubility, 10 out of 10. These things dilute down so easy. They make beautiful gradients, and you can actually create blends together with water techniques. Amazing pens. Line quality, 8.5. The harder one, perfect 10 out of 10. The softer one, a little bit more difficult to control. It would have got like a 6, 7 on its own, so we averaged. Total score 48.5, half a point above the Tombow Fudenosuke category. Honestly, that surprises me. I thought I would rate the Fudenosuke's higher. I think this is a weird score because there are things I love and things I hate about both types of the Pentel Sign pen. Averaging them out, I suppose if you could merge these two pens into something unique, it would be the best pen out there. Edding 1340 brush pen. This is a flexible brush nib black ink illustration pen that I got in a scrawler box back in 2018. I've had this for 4 years now. It is still truckin'. Longevity, 10 out of 10. The ink is still flowing. The nib has not frayed or got fuzzy or anything like that a lot of my other brush pens have done. Flexibility, 9 out of 10. I'm sure there are more flexible pens of this type, but this is really good. Stability, 8 out of 10. For the amount of flexibility, this is amazingly stable. Flow, 10 out of 10. Blendability, solubility, this does wet down into a beautiful gradient. You do still see ghosting of the original hard mark on the page, so it's not perfect. 9 out of 10. Line quality, 8 out of 10. If you know what you're doing with a brush pen, you can get exactly what you want with this. Overall, 56. Yet another highest score so far. Zebra mild liner brush pens. These are a double-ended highlighter pen. I included them in the ink pen category because they are an ink pen. They do have a brush nib. I'm sure you can get more traditional writing colors, but keep in mind that these are highlighters. Longevity, 9 out of 10. They have lasted a pretty long time. I believe I've had them for about 2 years. The nibs aren't going funny at all. Flexibility, 7 out of 10. Not the most flexible for a brush nib, but also not bad. Stability, 7 out of 10. For the amount of flexibility, you do get wobble. Flow, 7 out of 10. This is a highlighter ink. It looks very spotty on the page. It's supposed to be transparent. That's not really its fault, but compared to everything else in the category, it's not super wow. Blendability, solubility. Since I have 2 different colors, I did try to blend them together directly on the page with the nibs, and you get a bit of a ghosting over, a bit of a mid-tone color that creates a lot more white speckles. You don't get a nice blend. If you use water to blend them out, you do get a blended color in between, but you still see exactly where the original spots on the page were. 7.5 out of 10. Line quality, 8 out of 10. They are a stationary studying type tool, so you would expect a good line out of them, and you do get a good line out of them. Total is 45.5. Zebra Sensations brush pen. This is Zebra's version of the Tombow Fudenosuke pens. Longevity, 7 out of 10. I expect this nib to last exactly the same amount of time as the Fudenosukes and have the same shortfalls. Flexibility, 7 out of 10. This is one of the more flexible nibs. Stability, 9 out of 10. Flow, 8 out of 10. When you make really fast marks, you are going to get less pigmented spots on your stroke, but not bad. Blending, solubility, dilution. This, it just ghosts with water. It doesn't dissolve into a gradient. I think that this is meant to be waterproof, but it's not instantly waterproof, so it's not doing an amazing job at being waterproof, but it's also not doing an amazing job at being water soluble. 7 out of 10. Line quality, 8 out of 10. Overall score, 46 out of 60. 2 points behind the Fudenosuke. Very comparable pens. Basically the same thing. The Sakura Pigma BB is, I believe, the bold nib of the professional manga brush pen line made by Sakura. Longevity, 10 out of 10. This thing has stood the test of time. Flexibility, 9 out of 10. Same as the Edding. Very, very flexible. Stability, 8 out of 10. Same as the Edding. If you know what you're doing, you can really control this. If you don't know what you're doing, you're gonna wobble a bit. Flow, 9 out of 10. You instantly lose the consistency of the ink flow as is lifting up off the page in ways that I didn't expect. Blending, solubility, that kind of stuff. This does dissolve into a very nice gradient, but you can see a bit of ghosting of the edges of the original mark. 9 out of 10. Line quality, 9 out of 10. That's slightly better, half a point better than the editing. This is designed specifically for manga artists, comic artists, so it's natural to expect that you're going to be able to get an amazing line if you know what you're doing with a brush pen. Overall score is 54, which comes in 2 points lower than the editing, but it's still an amazingly high score on this list. If this is what you're using for your illustrations, I think you will be very pleased with it. Copic Multiliner has brush options. This is the medium brush. It is the only brush nib that I have from Copic in their fine liner line. I would be remiss not to include it, especially since we know Copic is going to just really shine in the alcohol category. Longevity, 7 out of 10. I have had this for 4 years and it is still kicking, but the nib is getting fuzzy. It is starting to show signs that it's heading the way of a lot of the other technical pen brush pens that I've thrown out over the years. Flexibility, 8 out of 10. Pretty good for a brush nib in a technical pen. Stability, 8 out of 10. If you know what you're doing, you're going to have a good time. Flow, 9 out of 10. Blending, solubility. This behaves like an ink that is supposed to be waterproof but isn't. It's not just ghosting, it is breaking down and making a gradient, but it's not completely dissolving, not even close. You get it wet and you get a mess. Line quality, 7 out of 10. Hate to say it, but total score is 45 out of 60, and that is the worst score so far in this category. Faber-Castell Pit Artist Pens, the brush pens. I have the regular brush nib and the soft brush. The soft brush is narrower and it is, as the name implies, softer, more flexible. Longevity, 7 out of 10. The oldest of these is doing the fuzzy, fraying, weird thing. Flexibility, 9 out of 10. That soft brush is amazingly flexible, so it brings the score up, even though the regular brush is about on par with Copic. Stability, 7 out of 10. Flow, 9 out of 10. Blending, solubility, that kind of stuff. You can force a blend. It's not going to be the prettiest. These don't claim to be waterproof, and they aren't. They do make a fairly nice gradient, but you are seeing a lot of ghosting of that original stroke, so I'm calling it 7 out of 10. Line quality, 8 out of 10. Overall score, 47 out of 60. These are definitely better than Copic's Multiliner if you want a brush nib. This is not a comment on which brand is better for the regular fine liner technical nibs. We are commenting only on the brush. Keep that in mind. Kuratake's Food Twin Pen. I'm not entirely sure on the proper name for this pen because there is only Japanese kanji on it. This is the one that is a black brush liner on one end and a gray brush liner on the other end. I thought that these two nibs were identical, but they aren't. You will see in the video footage that this did some interesting things. Longevity is 4 out of 10. I have had this pen for under a year. The black end is getting fuzzy, the ink is drying out. The gray end is still going strong in terms of ink wetness, but as you saw, the nib is either broken or loose. I thought it was super flexible when I was putting pressure down, but I was actually just putting the entire nib at an angle and it would stay that way until I put pressure on the other direction. Not good. Flexibility, 7 out of 10. Stability, 6 out of 10. I think if the nibs were secure, you would get decent stability, but they're not secure. Flow, 6 out of 10. Blendability, solubility, that kind of stuff. It blends out into gradients. The black ink, you see a lot of ghosting. The gray ink, you see no ghosting at all. The gray end of this pen is amazing, with the exception of the apparently loose or broken nib. The black end of this pen is very disappointing, and unfortunately that has pulled it way down. The final score is 37, and that is the worst score so far in this video. We haven't had a sub 40 score yet. Disappointing. I love Kuretake. The Marabu Fine Liner Graphix brush pen is an interesting beast. First of all, I'd like to comment that these do appear to be a private labeled product. I don't believe that this actual pen is exclusive to Marabu. They look very similar to what Pentalic sells. Longevity, 7 out of 10, just like the Copic and the Faber-Castells. This nib is getting very, very fuzzy. This very much reminds me of Sakura's Micron brush pens. They go really funky real fast. Flexibility, 9 out of 10. Stability, 6 out of 10. Flow, 7.5 out of 10. Blending, dilution, solubility. It makes nice gradients. You see a bit of ghosting on the edge. Line quality, 7 out of 10. I seem to remember that when this was new and the nib wasn't as frayed, it would have been more of an 8 out of 10. 10 it would have been. If you know what you're doing, you're fine. Total 44.5, second worst score on this list, coming in half a point below the Copic multiliner. Le Pen Flex by Marvi Uchida. I have the Oriental Blue shade. I love this pen, honestly. This is a fine liner pen with the tiniest, shortest little tapered flexible nib I have ever seen. Longevity 10 out of 10. I've had this thing for going on 3 years and it's still perfect. Flexibility 7 out of 10. Stability 9 out of 10. Flow 8 out of 10. Blending solubility. This waters down so nicely into a gradient. You are seeing a little bit of a ghosting of the original, but not much. I have used this for watercolor. I have just scribbled it onto other things, picked it back up. You get amazing pigmentation. The brush really lends itself to doing whatever technique you want. Line quality 8 out of 10, really good. Overall score is 50 out of 60. The King Art Inkline pen in the basic brush nib. It's an interesting one. The length and narrowness of the taper reminds me of things like the Pentel sign brush with the individual fibers. It looks like it should be a fiber-ended nib, but it's not. Longevity 8 out of 10. Flexibility 7.5 out of 10. It's just slightly better than the Tombow Fudinosuke's and the Zebra Sensations, those kind of pens. Just slightly more flexible. Stability 8 out of 10. Flow 8 out of 10. Blending solubility, again, like the Copic, those kind of markers, it looks like it's supposed to be water resistant, but it doesn't do a very good job of that. Line quality 8 out of 10. Graphix technical pen, fine liner, pigment ink pens. I would say this looks like the soft brush on a Pitt pen. Longevity 7 out of 10. It's starting to fray. This one's less than 2 years old and it's already starting to look like maybe I need to consider throwing it out. Flexibility 7 out of 10. Stability 8 out of 10. If you know what you're doing, you're probably going to be fine. Flow 8 out of 10. Blending solubility, it looks like it's supposed to be water resistant and it just isn't. Line quality 7 out of 10. When it was newer, that would have been a better score. Total score is 44 out of 60. Next we have the Artline Sticks brush marker. These are quite gimmicky. They have Lego impressions on the barrel. You can click them together and build stuff. I do believe these are marketed as a children's marker and they do feel very similar to something like a Crayola, but they are often sent out in art subscription boxes because they're loved by hand letterers and calligraphers. Longevity 10 out of 10. These things will last forever. Flexibility 4 out of 10. This is not a flexible nib. Stability 10 out of 10. It's a hard nib. Flow 7 out of 10. This is very splotchy ink. Blending 9 out of 10. Amazingly good. You get a good gradient out of it. You don't get a lot of ghosting. You can force a blend between different colors. Line quality 8 out of 10. If you know what you're doing, you're going to get amazing results with this. If you don't know what you're doing, you're going to think it's a children's marker. Total score 48 out of 60. This has pretty much the same nib as the Marabu Graphix, and it is starting to go fuzzy. Same 7 out of 10 score for longevity. Flexibility is 8. Stability 8 out of 10. Flow 8 out of 10. Blendability, you get a nice gradient out of it, but you are seeing ghosting of the original, so 8 out of 10. Line quality 7 out of 10. Total score is 46 out of 60. Last in the category is a double-ended calligraphy pen that I got off of Wish. One end is a massive chunk of a nylon flexible tapered brush nib, and it looks amazing. It looks like you would get really big strokes if you use the side, but it's only flexible on the end. The other end is a plastic nib. It is super flexible. I would compare it to the soft brush on the Tombow Fudinosuke's. Longevity 9 out of 10. Flexibility 8.5 out of 10. Stability 8 out of 10. Flow 7 out of 10. Blending solubility 7.5. Line quality 8 out of 10. Total score 48 out of 60. The winner for this category with a nearly perfect score of 56 out of 60 is the Edding 1340, followed very closely with a score of 54 by the Sakura Pigma BB. And after that, if you were curious, third place is the Pentel Colorbrush. We are moving on to the alcohol ink category now, the category you've probably all been waiting for, and we are starting it off with the star of the show, the Copic marker. I am using both the Copic Sketch and the Copic Chow because these are the two barrel types that have a brush nib. Copic also has the Copic Original, which is bullet and chisel, and they have the Copic Broad, which is just one really wide, flat chisel nib. Longevity gets 10 out of 10. Eventually, these nibs will wear out, but you can buy replacements for them, and I have not had to do that for any of my markers, and I have had Copics for 4 years now. You can also get ink refills for the entire line, so once you have Copic markers, you have Copic markers for life. Flexibility 8 out of 10. Stability 8 out of 10. Flow 9 out of 10. If the ink level isn't 100% full, then you are going to get lighter ink on your faster strokes. You are going to have to be slower and more controlled. Blending 9 out of 10 only because if you don't have a whole bunch of intermediate shades, you are are still going to see the original strokes a little bit. Line quality, 8 out of 10. If we were considering all nibs on the markers, this would be 10 out of 10 because we've got a chisel on this and you can do whatever you want with a chisel. I know some people hate on them, I love them, but this is a brush nib showdown. We are only grading the brush end of these bad boys. 8 out of 10. Total score is 52 out of 60. Let's see if anything else can beat it. Next up is Ohuhu's brush markers. These are one of my all-time favorites. You see me using them a lot on the channel. Longevity, 8 out of 10. These brush nibs do fray a lot faster than Copics brush nibs, so they are going to break down. You can pull them out and flip them, so you do have double the brush nibs in a single marker. There is talk of Ohuhu selling replacement brush nibs. I have not actually seen those available yet. They've also talked about ink refills, but they aren't selling them yet. They have talked about open stock colors. They only have a small selection available. Flexibility, 9 out of 10. These are softer than a Copic. Stability suffers there, 7 out of 10. Flow, 8 out of 10. Blending, 8 out of 10. With alcohol ink, you do need intermediate shades to get perfect gradients. Compared to Copic, this one didn't do as well, and you can see that in particular in the orange to yellow part of the blend. Line quality, same as Copic, 8 out of 10. Overall score is 48, 4 points behind Copic for minor reasons. Spectra AD / Blick Studio, I have asked many times, and I finally do have people confirming for me that they are exactly the same marker, just private labeled for different companies. Spectra AD is the traditional alcohol marker version of the Chart Pack marker, not to be confused with the actual Chart Pack branded marker that is xylene. Those are very, very stinky, completely different type of alcohol. Longevity, 7.5. If we're only considering the ones I have, the Spectra AD, they're supposed to be ink refills, they're supposed to be replacement nibs, but I have never seen them. There's nothing. Once they're dead, they're dead. You're better off buying a new marker. And they're super cheap, so I don't mind doing that. In terms of the Blick Studio does sell replacement nibs, and they do sell re-inkers for their entire range. We're going to call this a 7.5. Flexibility, 8 out of 10. These are very, very similar to Copic's nibs. Stability, same thing, 8 out of 10. Flow, I'm calling it an 8 out of 10. Blending, 9 out of 10. Right up there with Copic. I wasn't sure if I was going to call it an 8.5 or a 9, but you know what? This does really, really well. And that makes sense to me because this is the brand that I have found blends best with Copic. It plays nicest with Copic. Line quality, 8 out of 10. Overall score is 48.5, just a little bit better than the Ohuhu. And honestly, if they had the longevity score, they would be right up there with Copic. Next up is Art and Fly. I just recently did a full first impression review on this skin tone set. I don't have a blender for this, so I used Copic's blender. Longevity, 9 out of 10. I really don't know how these nibs are going to hold up because these are so new to me, but they seem pretty good quality, and this is one of those brands where you can buy replacement nibs and replacement ink no matter where you are in the world. Basically as good as a Copic. I'm not going to give it the perfect 10 out of 10 because I don't know how long these nibs last. Flexibility, 8.5. They're slightly more flexible than Copic, but not as bendy as the Ohuhus. Stability, 8 out of 10, pretty standard at this point. Flow, 7 out of 10. It does seem like the ink comes a bit slower. Blendability, 10 out of 10. These blend better than Copic's. Granted, my little pastel rainbow here is probably a bit closer to the intermediate tones you want to blend together. It's not as jarringly different as true red, true orange, true yellow, but that blend is seamless. Line quality, 8 out of 10. Total score is 50.5. If they had better ink flow, they would be winning this category. Next up is Parku. This is a budget-friendly brush marker that was sent to me by the manufacturers to review last year. They only come in a couple of small sets. Longevity, 7 out of 10, lowest score so far because not only do I not know how these brush nibs are going to stand up, I suspect that they will probably prove to be the same as Ohuhu. They'll probably beat themselves up faster. They are single-ended. They're not like the Ohuhu where you can turn around, and there, as far as I know, there are no replacements for these markers. No replacement nibs, no re-inkers. Flexibility, 8 out of 10, very similar to the Copic. Stability, 8 out of 10. Flow, 8 out of 10. Blending, 6 out of 10. These are not very good in terms of alcohol ink. We're not getting a nice smooth feathered transition. We are getting splotchy ink warring with other ink, and we get a lot of muddy, weird colors created in the blend, not the transition tones you expect. Line quality, 8 out of 10. Total score is 45, lowest in this category, but a good score in all of the other categories. SketchBox Signature 2.0 brush marker. These are a brush marker designed to be a Copic sketch competitor, and these are exclusive to SketchBox. You can only get in the actual actual monthly sketch boxes when they're doing alcohol markers, and sometimes they might sell them individually on their store. They are super expensive. Longevity, 5 out of 10. There are no replacements for this, and they're doing really weird fuzzy stuff. A lot of my brush nibs, it's not that they're fraying at the ends with use like the Ohuhu's does. It's like they're going from a nice solid spongy nib to like a sea sponge with holes in it. And as I showed you up close on screen, the chisel nib on the blush pink, it has like this waxy stuff happening coming off of all the edges of the chisel. It wasn't like that when I got the marker. This is what it has done since, so I believe that that is the alcohol ink reacting with whatever material they made their nibs out of. Flexibility, 9 out of 10. These are softer like the Ohuhu's. Stability, 7 out of 10. Flow is 8 out of 10. Blending is 9 out of 10. These are comparable to blendability with Copics. Line quality, 7.5, just a little bit lower than everybody else in the category, just because I got the most wobble on this one. A note on the ink flow, don't judge the pigmentation you're seeing on the video. That was not a black, that was a neutral gray 8. Opus Essential Marker, an interesting case, and I debated on whether or not I was going to include it. This is a private label store brand for Opus Framing and Art Supplies, which is a chain of art stores in British Columbia, Canada, and I have never seen this offered as a range of colors. When I bought it, they only had black. You're not going to get an artist range of colors. This is more meant to be a permanent marker that you might use for brush scripting, that sort of thing. So asterisk on the scores here. Longevity, 7.5. In any other category, this would be getting an 8 or a 9. I have owned this for many, many years, but in this category in particular, you expect to be able to get replacements for the nib and for the ink. This is a cheap store brand. Once it starts to die, throw it away, buy another one sort of marker. Flexibility, 10 out of 10. Stability, 8 out of 10. It hasn't lost anything because of that flexibility. Copic could learn something from whoever made the brush nib on this marker. Flow, 9 out of 10. Blending, this is where it gets tricky. I put 7 with a question mark. It is reactive with the blender, but that's all I can judge. Line quality, 8 out of 10. Overall score is 49.5 with that asterisk. Winsor Newton Pro Marker Brush Marker. Note before I start, these used to be the Letraset markers, and then Winsor Newton bought them. They used to only call their bullet and chisel combination the Pro Marker, and this was the brush marker. This is brush and chisel, but they have rebranded again, and now you have Winsor Newton Pro Marker and Winsor Newton Pro Marker Brush. Longevity, 8 out of 10. Really, I should score it lower because there are no replacements, no refills, none of that, but I haven't had any of the nibs fray on me yet, and I actually bought Winsor Newtons before I started buying Copics. These have stood the test of time. Flexibility, 9.5 out of 10. These are super, super flexible, maybe not quite as flexible as that Opus. Some people may not like that, they're kind of soft. Stability does suffer, it's getting 7 out of 10. Flow is 8 out of 10, pretty standard. Blending is 8 out of 10, I would compare it to the Ohuhu's. Line, 8 out of 10, just like most of the things in this category. Final score is 48.5, half a point better than the Ohuhu, tied with the Spectra AD / Blick Studio Spectrum Noir Illustrator. This is the brush nib offering in alcohol markers from Spectrum Noir. This is brush and bullet. Longevity, 7.5. Technically, you can get replacements for this. I have never seen them offered anywhere except through Spectrum Noir's own website, which of course is going to be whatever the price they want it to be, and not the best deal on shipping. Flexibility, 9 out of 10. Honestly, I thought that these were going to be more flexible than the Winsor Newton, but not really. Stability, 7 out of 10. Flow, 6 out of 10. These are the slowest flowing alcohol ink markers I have ever tried. I always think that they're drying out. I thought that they were drying out after the very first piece I did with them. They're not. There's lots of ink in there. They're just very slow to flow. I don't know if that's the fault of the ink storage system inside the barrel, or if these nibs just aren't that absorbent. Blending, 7 out of 10. These are almost as bad as the Parcours. You can force a blend. It's going to take a lot of work, but in the meantime, you are going to get some funky different shades happening there. I think my orange is a bit contaminated with something else, but like alcohol markers are supposed to be very self-cleaning. You're supposed to be able to get the ink out of the nib even if the nib itself remains stained, and that's not the case here. I've got a lot of mud happening. Line quality 7.5. Overall score is 44 out of 60. That is the lowest score in this category. Again though, would have been a middle of the road score in the other categories, but I do think this one's going to lose the category. Tombow ABT, the alcohol version of their dual art pens. These are brush and chisel, and quite frankly one of my favorite chisel nibs in the marker world. Longevity, I'm calling these 8.5. When I was judging the water-based one, I called it a 10 out of 10 because these nibs last forever. In the alcohol ink category, we do have to consider refills, that kind of opportunity. At this time, Tombow is not selling replacement nibs, they're not selling ink refills, but you can buy the entire color range open stock, and the price has come down, so they're somewhere in between. The individual marker's not going to last you forever. It is a good quality nib. You're probably going to replace it because of the ink, not the nib, but it doesn't have the advantage of something like Copic where everything is replaceable. Flexibility 8 out of 10, right up there with Copic. Stability 8 out of 10. Flow 9 out of 10. Blending 8 out of 10. When these blend, they blend well, but this is one of those brands where you absolutely have to have those intermediate tones, otherwise it's going to be difficult, and not having intermediate tones is why I didn't like them when I first got them, because I had such different colors. I didn't have a blending set. Once I got to try a blending set, I fell in love with these, and I would love to have more. Line quality 8 out of 10, pretty standard. I would actually rate it higher at a 9 because you can control it amazingly well, but this ink does spread on most papers, so despite your ability to control it, the ink is actually against you. 8 out of 10, just like just about everything else in the category. Final score is 49.5. That ties it technically with Opus Essentials, but I would say it beats out Opus Essentials because there is a color selection here. Piano brush marker. This is an interesting brush marker that I discovered on Wish. This is one of those markers that I was curious about when I wanted to try Copics, but I had not yet taken the plunge on the price of Copics. I believe this was the second marker brand I ever owned with a brush nib on it. They're an interesting, somewhat rounded triangular barrel. Honestly, the reason these aren't in my regular rotational collection is because the barrel is longer than most things. Longevity, 7 out of 10. I'm giving it the same longevity score as Parkou because you can't replace anything on this. You have to order sets, you have to order them overseas, but I've owned these for over 4 years and I don't need to replace anything yet. The nibs are fine, the ink is fine. Flexibility, 7 out of 10. This is the firmest nib so far in this category. Stability, 9 out of 10. Flow, 9 out of 10. Blending, 8.5. Almost as good as Copic. That pink into that orange shade is chef's kiss, perfect. The orange shade into the brown is looking a little more like what things like Ohuhu and Winsor Newton are doing. Line quality, 9 out of 10. Overall score is 49.5, tied with the Tombow ABT. Return of Sta color marker. The barrel is almost identical to the Bianno, but it is not the same ink and it is not the same nibs. Longevity, I'm giving it the same score as Bianno, 7 out of 10. There's no replacement nibs, there's no replacement ink, as far as I know, but point in its favor, as you can see I have one. You can order them open stock. Flexibility, 9 out of 10. Stability, 8 out of 10. Flow, 9 out of 10. Blend, 8 with an asterisk because I only have one color. I can't blend it with others of its own kind. It's very easy to react with the Copic blender, so I expect it would work well. It looks like it responded to the blender about as well as Winsor Newton responds to its own blender. Line quality, 9 out of 10. Overall score is 50 with an asterisk. Double Line by Genvana. Double Line was the second time I decided to take a chance on a listing on Wish. First time I got a brush marker. I have things to say. First of all, longevity, 6 out of 10. Second worst on the list. When they're good, but some of the colors, the nibs go really fuzzy and funny, and I have had to throw them out. Flexibility, 7 out of 10. Stability, 7. Flow, 6.5. Not quite as slow flowing as Spectrum Noir, but almost as bad, and they dry up faster. Legitimately dry up. Blending, 8. Line quality, 8. Fairly standard. Overall score is 42.5. That is the lowest in the category by 1.5 points, and these are losing. I'm surprised that Spectrum Noir has not lost the category, but if they were going to lose it to anything, it would be these. Extra comment, they have the weirdest smell. They have a very strong smell. It's not a bad, dangerous, chemically smell. It's pleasant to be around. It's kind of sweet, but I've never found another alcohol marker that does that. I'm not sticking my nose in it. The whole room smells like that when they're uncapped. Winner for the category at 52 points out of a possible 60 is, unsurprisingly, Copic. But very close behind it, 50.5, only 1.5 points behind is Art and Fly. I'm really surprised that Ohuhu didn't do as well in this category, but really, we're talking about a difference of 4 points between Copic and Ohuhu. Really, this was a race between what's a good brush marker in the alcohol category and what is a bad marker. I hope this video wasn't too long, and I hope it wasn't too boring. Thank you to whoever asked me for a brush marker showdown. I probably took it to places you didn't expect it to go. Summary: in the regular ink pen category, the winner was the Edding 1340. In the alcohol marker category, which is probably what you were all here for, the winner is unsurprisingly Copic. But what we saw is there are great brush markers in the alcohol category, and there are terrible markers in the alcohol category, and no in between. Winner in the watercolor category was the Karin Brushmarker Pro. Surprised me, beat out what I thought were the more professional brands. And a winner in the paint acrylic marker, only 2 in the category, only won by a single point, but again, Karin. So yeah, I do suspect that that means that if Karin put out regular ink markers and alcohol ink markers, they would have just taken it away. They would have won the entire video. What do you think? If you own the brands that I tried, tell me if I'm right or wrong. What are your opinions? And if you have other brands that I didn't try, how do you think they would have fared compared to what I tested? If you're looking for more to watch, I've got some suggestions up on the left side of the screen now. Don't forget to like, comment, maybe even subscribe, and if you like living life creatively, whatever that means to you, I'd love to have you along for the ride. Bye, guys!